Hello, audience driven. I am so excited to inform you how to podcast, how to find your purpose, process, production, marketing, monetization. I call it the 3 Ps and the M&Ms. This is going to be so exciting, so be sure you get your notepads out. My name is Espree Devora. I've been featured on Apple, on Spotify. I've been podcasting since 2013. I've produced over 700 episodes, and today is a special segment just for you, audience driven, on how to build your audience, how to get over that hump of like, is it too late to podcast? No, it's not. I'll jump straight to that. It is not too late to podcast, but what it is too late for, it's too late not to know your purpose. So you really want to make sure you hone in on your purpose, and I'm going to get into how to do that, and then how to attract an audience that is just so riveted by your content they can't help but want to be part of your community, how to market it so you could get the word out to sponsors and to different partners, and then very last, how to monetize your content. So are you ready? All right, let's get into it. Okay, so the 3 Ps and the M&Ms. The first one, and it's in this order: purpose, process, production, marketing, monetization. That's purpose, process, production, marketing, monetization. So you start with your purpose. What is your podcast purpose? Your podcast purpose is, I call it the triangle of purpose. What's in it for you, what's in it for the listeners, and what's in it for your guests if you have guests. Triangle of purpose. Purpose for you, purpose for your listeners, purpose for your guests. If you don't have all those different points worked out, it makes it really hard to, one, get guests, attract the audience that you want to attract, and feel motivated on the days where you just don't want to do it anymore. You don't want to show up to the mic, and those days do happen. They happen for all of us. They've happened for me, they've happened for other pro podcasters, and they've happened to other people just starting out. And you don't want to hit that pod fade, which a lot of new podcasters hit around 7 episodes. They start to get really discouraged, thinking, like, why am I not getting the numbers that I want to get? The reason you're not getting the numbers you want to get is, one, you didn't set up the expectations of what success is for you beforehand. You didn't understand your purpose, your own individual purpose of why you're doing this in the first place, and you're not applying marketing experiments related to your purpose, which we'll get into in the future, right? And you don't know that actually the norm in the beginning is only 130 podcast listeners. I know, it's crazy. It's not like YouTube. It's not different. We're going to also get into the difference between audio and video podcasting. But being an audio podcaster is not like YouTube. 130 podcast listeners means you are doing great when you start. There's only 1% of podcasts that has the multi-thousands listeners. So you want to start at the beginning, and you want to be really clear about why you're doing this, why you want to create a podcast. So let's get deeper into purpose. So we have the purpose for you, the purpose for the guest, and the purpose for the listeners, right? So in the purpose for you, why does this matter to you? So I produce the Women in Tech podcast, and I host the Women in Tech podcast. The purpose of the show, what really matters to me, is if she can do it, so can I. I want listeners to walk away feeling, if she can do it, so can I. Why is that important to me? That's important to me because I built the first action sports company, the first action sports social network, and I felt that I didn't believe in myself enough, right? And later in my journey, I realized I did have everything that it takes to succeed, but I just didn't believe in myself enough. And that was really problematic, right? And so I wanted to create a positive piece of content to inspire listeners that they are fully capable to accomplish and achieve their dreams. And that is, if she can do it, so can I. I want to show examples of what's possible to expand our minds so that you can do it too, right? So that's my why. That's why when I'm in London, or I'm in these countries around the world, in Bosnia and Kazakhstan, and I feel so exhausted interviewing 10 women at a time, sometimes back to back to back, I just really feel committed to championing her story so that other people can be inspired too, and that she could have that moment to shine. And so that's what keeps me going on the hard days. Now let's get into the purpose of your guest. You're probably thinking, man, why is anybody gonna get on my show? It's just totally new. If you wanna have a guest, that is, it's totally new. Why would people wanna get on my show? When you're so in alignment, with your purpose, so connected to your purpose, and you understand your mission, you don't message someone saying, hey, like, will you be on my show? But I'm sorry, I have no listeners. You don't lead with that. You lead, I wanted to create something where women can, you know, have a bigger vision to believe in themselves so they could achieve their dreams. And here's my story of why I've been so inspired, you know, person you're talking to, by what you've done in your life and the stories you shared. It would be amazing to share your story with my audience too, so that they could be as inspired as I've been by you. First of all, who doesn't want to receive a compliment, right? Who doesn't want to see that their work has been acknowledged? And then when you lead with your mission, it creates so much more connectivity than just leading with like numbers and data. Like, people a lot of the time care more about the emotional why underneath it than they do care about the vanity and metric stuff. You'd be surprised, right? Also, another like tip that I should probably wait to later on, but since we're talking about guests, if you have a guest that is looking to promote a book, that's looking to promote a movie, that's looking to promote artwork, if they're looking to promote anything of their own, if they have something coming out, perfect time to reach out to them. It levels it up. So lead with your mission, and if you double that up with they're looking to promote something, you're going to be able to get those guests. Last guesting tip, in order to attract guests to your show, there's great sites. There's one called, there are podcast matchmaking sites. There's Podcast Hawk. There's Guestio. There's Matchmaker. There's Pod Scout. Check out any of these sites and you will be able to, and a lot of them are free, to upload a profile and then book different guests. Like, that's what they'll look for, and you're able to book the guests on your show. So check out these podcast matchmaking sites. Then last up, and the most important piece, is the listener, right? If you don't clearly let the listener if you don't clearly let the listener know like why your show is valuable in their life, like are they listening when they're doing the dishes? Are they listening when they're exercising? Are they listening to be inspired? Are they listening at work? Are they listening to be entertained? Are they listening to learn something? Are they listening to escape? What is their purpose for listening? Are you meeting that purpose? And what do they get out of your show? Like I said, Women in Tech podcast, you leave having more belief in yourself. That is the purpose for me, that every listener leaves having even more belief in ourselves, right? And so what is the purpose for your show? What would you like listeners to walk away with? What are they doing in between your episodes that attracts them to want to come back because you matter so much in their lives? I've said from a really early time in my podcasting career, I've said I much prefer listeners be mentally subscribed to my podcast than physically subscribed. Like, physically subscribed, you could change your app, your app can delete you could change your phone. There's all these stuff that could happen, all the notifications of all the different things, you get distracted. But if someone is mentally subscribed to your show, there is no better way that they'll come back to listen again because they're thinking about it all the time, right? So that is purpose. So again, we have purpose, process, production, marketing, monetization. We're about to get into process. What is process? So now that you have your purpose, you understand what's in it for you, what's in it for the guests, what's in it for the listeners. Now you want to think about, like, what is my dream way to produce this? Now, a huge mistake most new podcasters make is they start with, what mic should I get? What mic is everybody using? What equipment do I need? Wrong. That is just a huge mistake, because you can't know what equipment you need until you first understand your purpose, and because that will lead you to the type of content you want to create. And then you understand your process, which is your dream of how you'd like to produce your podcast. Like, your dream. Do you want to edit yourself? Do you not want to edit? Do you want a studio? Do you not want a studio? Do you want to do it remotely? Do you want to do it in person? Do you want to do video? Do you want to do audio? You got to ask yourself all of these questions, right? And then that tells you what kind of things you'll need. I call it architecting the reality of your podcast. Where does your podcast live? Do you have podcast posters? Do you have podcast keychains? Do you have podcast stickers? Do you have a podcast community? Like, what's the world of your podcast? So you want to architect the world of your podcast in order to have that home that everyone is really magnetically attracted to what you're creating. So you see how you're dreamscaping that in the process step. So when you get to the production step, the equipment step, then you'll be able to know from the process side what equipment is necessary in order to make those dreams a reality. Also in the process step, you're going to outline your resources. What budget do you have available? What equipment do you already own? Do you have a phone? I think most of us have a phone, right? You could totally create a podcast from your phone. Yes. There are amazing pieces of equipment that stick right into your phone, or even voice memo on your phone. I have done podcast episodes sitting in my car or under a blanket in my closet, just with a voice memo on my phone, and it is enough. A secret trick to that is you don't want to use headphones. You want to be speaking directly into the speaker, and that is the best way to get great audio quality, right? From a phone. So you could do, if you don't have any equipment attached. So think about just the dream. So, and I produce every single one of my, so I have multiple podcasts. So the Women in Tech podcast, that's a travel podcast where, of course, with the pandemic, this is like halted a bit, everything's remote, but in general, that's an in-person podcast. I use an H1 Zoom recorder, and then I plug in lapel mics, and then I travel with some light gear and stuff like that, but I use mobile gear is what I'm trying to get at. My We Are LA Tech podcast, that's an in-studio podcast. For years, I've had a studio in Los Angeles. Guests come in, I interview them there. I want to create community. I want one guest to come and the other guest to be leaving, and for them to meet one another, because community is such an important aspect of that podcast, right? And then I'm launching a new podcast called Brag, Business Women Reaching Awe-Inspiring Greatness. For that one, I'll be using Fireside app to record the podcast. And I wanted that specifically because I did not want video. I wanted something really easy, quick, and I think it's advantageous to have that particular podcast first be live, and then I'm going to redo the live into a post-produced version, right? So that's Fireside Chat, Fire app, but you get the idea. It's the new app that Mark Cuban created, right? The point is that we use different technology, different equipment for every type of production depending on what you want to create. Hands down, when I do remote recording, which of course I've done all the pandemic, I use Squadcast. Squadcast is amazing, especially because I do not have to worry whether there's a backup. I never have to worry about losing a file, which is a huge deal. I mean, right now I'm recording and I don't have a second camera set up. So like, what if this just deleted? That would be awful, and you definitely don't want to do that with a guest, right? It's happened to me before. I did an interview on Skype, or in my early days, it got lost, there was no backup, it was one of my favorite interviews, and it's gone forever. Super sucks. You don't want that to happen. So with Squadcast, I never have to worry about that because their backup system's pristine. They also integrate with Dolby for high quality audio, which is great. I can master high quality audio in one click, which makes it really easy for me. And it's just a great remote recording system, right? So now we're gonna get into, so we've talked about purpose, right? Your triangle purpose. We've talked about process, where you're dreaming up of what the perfect like lifestyle of your podcast is, from production to the community around it to maybe different merchandise you have. And now we're going to talk about production. We're going to get into the equipment, right? And so you want to think about, do you want a video podcast or do you want an audio podcast? I highly recommend being an audio first podcast if you're looking to be a podcaster. Being a YouTuber is such a different ecosystem. You can't have your podcast just succeed on YouTube. You have to do YouTube related marketing to succeed on YouTube, which is different than podcast related marketing. It's totally different. I should say audio podcast related marketing. So audio podcast is when you're airing on Google Play and on Google Podcasts and on Spotify and on Apple. Those are audio podcasts. When you're having your podcast video in YouTube, it's just different. You have to think about the recording. You have to think about what camera, lighting, how you're gonna set it up. just different marketing, and not only the production side, from like growing the channel, it's an entirely different ecosystem. So if you're video first, I would think about the terminology of how do I become a YouTuber. If you're audio first, then I think how do I become a podcaster. If you're looking to do both, plan on doing double the work because it's totally different on both sides. Now for audio podcasting, what to think about in equipment. Remember, do you want to be a remote? Do you want to be in person? What I use in person, like I said, for the Women in Tech podcast, I use an H1 Zoom. That's an H1 Zoom. Love it. Mobile, easy to use, travel around. In studio, I use an H6 Zoom. For video, I really love the Mevo. If you look up Mevo, amazing camera. The Canon G7X is what I'm recording on right now. Incredible. It's like known for vloggers. Mics is the Shure MV, I think it's the MV7. Oh, I have to let you know, but there's a Shure mic that plugs into your iPhone that's really great. A lot of people use the Audio-Technica 2100, which is a great beginner mic, and it actually carries you through your whole podcasting career. I still use that on a daily basis. And the Samsung G-Track Pro is phenomenal. Like, it's so great. And I know a lot of people use the Yeti. I have the Yeti too. My first mic was the Snowball. I'm not a huge fan of the Yeti. I'm not a big fan of it. Love the Snowball. It's a very versatile mic, but again, you pick up all the room sounds with the Snowball, and I want something just to pick up the audio in front of my mouth. So I rely on my Audio-Technica 2100 and my Samsung G-Track Pro for audio, as well as just voice memo on the phone sometimes, truly. And to think about how do you produce, like how do you get a studio, do you not get a studio, and all this stuff. For equipment, I already mentioned, for remote podcasting, I use Squadcast. If you get a studio, I wouldn't recommend like going out getting a studio right away because it's just not necessary. But the number one thing to pay attention to is sound, like listening to the air bounce off of the walls. You want to make sure, like conference rooms, terrible for podcasting. Don't do a conference room. Like typical offices, terrible for podcasting. The funniest places that are great for podcasting are inside a car, inside of a closet, on the low budget way. I loved having a studio for the culture of having a studio, but I also think it's a bit much and you probably don't want to invest your time, your money, and your resources that way. So I would recommend having on-the-go equipment, just going to someone's place and having the right equipment. Like I said, the Zoom H6 is one of my favorite pieces of equipment. You could just plug in a couple mics, go to wherever someone's located, find a good spot. I've done interviews in stairwell hallways on the road. I listen for the air sound. I listen for the balance of the vocals, and that's what tells me, am I in a good spot or not? So that's a little bit about production. The next thing that new podcasters make a huge mistake about on the production side is they think, I just want to get my podcast like on Apple, on Spotify. How do I do that? Let me get a podcast host, is what it's called. So this is not a host of, I'm hosting the podcast. This is a host that distributes your audio file to the platforms. The biggest mistake new podcasters make is they don't think about the analytics behind the podcast host that they're choosing. They don't think about the marketing tool set that the podcast host has. There's all these features that each podcast host has, and they differ from one another. And once you signed up with one podcast host, you really don't want to go through the trouble of switching. So I personally use Simplecast, and Simplecast is known for security and analytics. Transistor is a great one that's run by Justin Jackson. There's another great one called Buzzsprout that's known for marketing. There's Libsyn. There's some great podcast hosts. So I would just do my research to which one is the best match for you. And if you have any questions while you're going through this journey, just at Espree Devora on social, or email me espree@hey.com. That's Espree, ESPREE @HEY.com. And I'm happy to answer your questions. But really, take a step back and ask yourself, which tool set best serves what I'm looking to do? Because the right answer is going to be different for every person. Don't think that there's just one formula for everyone. I always like to say, I believe your intuition is your oracle. So what does your intuition tell you? What does your gut tell you? Truly, there's not one right answer for absolutely everybody. So now we have purpose, process, production, 3 P's, and the M&Ms. So let's get into the M&Ms. So first we have marketing, and then we have monetization. So for marketing, all right, you want to think about, this is a thing that gets missed a lot, you want to think about the listener journey. What is the journey you are taking each listener on? You also want to think about the guest campaign. How is the guest finding out that you have that your podcast with them aired? Are you promoting it beforehand? Are you promoting it after? Are you creating clips for the podcast guests? If you're doing podcasts utilizing Clubhouse, an amazing tool is headliner.ai. Now you may have heard of a tool called Headliner that is headliner.app. Same company, but if you do headliner.ai, they have a new tool called Backstage that is amazing. And all you do is you put your Clubhouse URL, your event URL, in Headliner, and just like that, it records your room, and you have all, it's so cool because you have all these smart quotable things that Headliner finds you with their AI system, and you could quickly turn them into a video so that you could promote the episode after if you end up recording that way. So headliner.ai, if you want to go super minimalistic, that is a great way to do it, to record your full Clubhouse room and then create the little social promos with it, and the AI will find you the smart parts, right? There's also headliner.app. That's if you want to create a more custom graphic, a custom episode trailer. You want to think about, what are you posting on social? What are you giving to guests to empower them to share, to make it more fun for them to share? And what is the listener journey? Like, why are people listening? Where are they listening? Where are they going to after? How are you supporting them in that process? So for example, if you have a lot of quotes, if you have takeaways from your podcast episodes, can you create a PDF for listeners that they can then download from signing up for with email on your website, or like in the show notes you link to how to get that, right? And so you want to think about your listener through and through, you want to think about your guest through and through, and you want to think about how you're communicating with them, and really take a moment to write out all the steps. It's like, okay, my listener is this type of person, they're coming from school, they're coming from work, they're cooking right now, whatever it is, they're listening for this reason, and then after that, here's the type of groups they hang out in, and here's the resources I've created for them, and then they find out about my episode again in this way. And for guests, think about like, okay, like, am I sharing that I'm talking about them on my Instagram, on my Twitter? Do I have a Pinterest board of all my episodes, right? When I do the interview, I'm doing the interview, and then right after that, can I share a Giphy like on my social networks? What are all the ways that you can like celebrate the guest in that journey, right? And then let's talk a little bit about podcasting SEO. I think this gets missed a lot. So I've talked about like an email, signing up for potential listeners signing up with email to get something like a PDF. Well, the best way to do that is if you have a website for your podcast. And a lot of the websites that these podcast hosts give you, and a lot of the podcast hosts do give you a one-page website for free, which is super cool. But what they miss is they miss incorporating email sign up. And I think hands down the best way to have a website for your podcast that's SEO powered is podpage.com. So check out podpage.com. It's absolutely extraordinary, and with the code Espree VIP you even get a month free, which is really cool, so you can test it out, right? Espree VIP, you could have a month free. So check out Podpage, and what you want to do is you want to think about, what keyword do you want your podcast to be found for? So many podcasters don't think about this, or they're doing something, well, they don't think about it, and they end up being found for things that aren't even related to their podcast because they aren't doing anything with intention. So if you are, let's say, a shoe podcast, right? You have you have a podcast about shoes and you want to be found for maybe, let's say it's like high top Nike sneakers, right? Are you optimizing for high top Nike sneakers on your website? Are you creating blog content? Are you using those key terms in your headline, in your description? Like, how are you optimizing for search engine optimization in your podcast? Now, I use a tool called SEMrush. That's SEMrush.com. It's so awesome. You could just put in your website, see what you're being found for. You could even see what your competitors are being found for, which is amazing. And then you could start to do research that way. You could see what gets the most search volume. It's awesome. So check out SEMrush. A free one is called Ubersuggest. So if you look up Ubersuggest, that's free. You could do keyword research that way. What's important is that you do keyword research when marketing your podcast. You want to be very intentional. On your host, you're able to put in different keywords and tags. So you want to have that same keyword absolutely everywhere. You want to have it in the image file names. Just blow up the internet with your keywords, so when people are searching on Google, they find you. Another great site to know about is Answer the Public. AnswerThePublic.com is so awesome because it shows you what the public is searching for on the internet, so you could answer their questions in your podcast, meaning in your podcast titles, in, again, the show description, on your website, blog titles, all those different ways. You want to consistently be answering the public with your podcast. And so when you think about marketing, you want to think about, what are all the ways that I am best serving my audience and that I'm optimizing for a very specific keyword, and am I doing that well, and is it showing up for Google, and let me search in tools like SEMrush or Ubersuggest to make sure all the work that I'm putting in is indeed showing up that way. And do not sleep on the Twitter hashtag podcast recommendations. Podcast recommendations hashtag on Twitter is clutch. And a little secret trick with podcast recommendations hashtag is, if you wanted to use a tool called Loom, you could create a personal video for people looking for for podcasts and talk about your recommendation in the Loom video. So if you use Loom, you could put a little personal video in your tweet back to people searching for podcast recommendations, and anything that you do that is a little bit more personal makes a lot bigger of an impression. Speaking of being of authentically connecting with people, do not sleep on Instagram commenting. I don't recommend using bots. It's just not sincere. Search hashtags related to your podcast content and meaningfully engage with people. They will end up looking at your Instagram profile and Instagram posts, and this is how you'll build an audience. You do want to be doing this regularly, and yes, it does take a lot to market. So you want to choose what you want to focus on, and in little pieces. So maybe 1 month in January, you're like, okay, I'm going to focus fully on Instagram commenting. And then the next month in February, you're like, okay, I'm going to fully focus on creating like engaged tweet responses. And then the third month, it's going to be, okay, I'm going to fully engage in the new experiment. Don't think of marketing as marketing. Think of it as experiments, or else it gets totally overwhelming. And with the experiments, think about, what is the goal you'd like to achieve? Write that down. And then see what goal you actually attained, so that you can make really realistic goal setting moving forward, right? So you think about, what is the goal that you want to achieve, and what is it that you actually achieved, and then what can you tweak to improve it, or should you just get rid of that marketing task entirely? Did it not work at all? So think about that as well. And then let's get into monetization. All right. So many different ways to monetize a podcast. You can do affiliate links. You could get sponsorship from brands. You could sell merchandise. You could do a private podcast where people pay to access your podcast. A great one for that is Supercast. Supercast makes it possible to have a private podcast where people can pay to access the podcast. So think about selling books, like selling your consulting services. Think about what feels best for you and do it that way. The one thing I want to say about sponsorships is, you don't need to do it like by listenership. What you need to do with sponsorships is make sure you have the right value match. And here's what I mean by that. If you want to have a sponsor, and let's say you want to charge a sponsor $1,000 to sponsor your podcast. So we're not talking about per listenership, we're just $1,000 flat, right? And you only have 100 listeners, but then you form an agreement with a brand who has a product that sells for $5,000, and you have confidence that 1 out of your 100 listeners will buy the $5,000 product. That means that brand just made $4,000 on their sponsorship. So you see, even with only 100 listeners, you could still have a lucrative brand sponsorship. It's all about the right value match. If a brand is selling, let's say, a journal for $30, you're going to need so many more listeners to purchase in order to make that $1,000 fee that you charged, right? That's why you want to go with a higher price product. Affiliates are where if people click on the link in your show notes or go to, if you mention a special link in your podcast episodes, and the brands can track that, they'll pay you a commission for everybody that ended up purchasing. So you could go the affiliate route. Merchandise, if you want to create stickers and hoodies and t-shirts and all this kind of stuff, you could maybe create a Shopify store where people could buy that for you. There's so many different options of how you could build this, but just think about, this world is yours to create, this podcast world. The most important thing is to go back to your why, because people get lost in wanting to make a quick buck. I would not recommend podcasting for wanting to make a quick buck. They get lost in actually wanting to be a YouTuber and creating a podcast in attempt to be a YouTuber, getting confused why they're not getting listeners when really, or subscribers, when really they weren't really focused on what their priority was. They are not getting the listenership because they thought they would have like a few thousand listeners like YouTube, when really 130 is like doing really well. So you want to really have your expectations set at the beginning, and then just do it for your why, right? You're doing it for your purpose that you really took time to think about and really connects with you. Don't podcast just because everybody has a podcast. Podcast because you want to. Podcast because it's meaningful. Podcast because you just simply have to share your art. I call podcasting painting audio. It's an art form to me. It's something that I feel is a very connective medium. There's no stronger relationship than you're in someone's ear. Like, you know, you're in someone's ears that form the relationship with the host. It's such an honor to be a podcaster. So do not get caught up in the hype. Get caught up in your purpose. My name is Espree Devora, and I am so excited to be sharing this story with you for Audience Driven. I hope this helps. Remember to connect with me on social media at Espree Devora on all social. Say hello. You can email me, espree@hey.com. Check out my podcast, Women in Tech, womenintech.fm, wearelatech.fm, and I will see you guys in the next episode. Bye.